Returning to our top story now, and Sydney is preparing for the arrival of President George W. Bush in 24 hours. Security is already at extremely high levels and will only increase as President Bush and 20 other world leaders arrive during the course of this week. So far, the coverage of APEC has been dominated by the major disruptions to Sydney's central business district, creating a tough environment for the Howard government as it tries to deliver its message that APEC is putting Australia at the front and centre of the international community. Just a short time ago, I spoke to Australia's Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer. Mr Downer, thanks for joining Lateline.
It's a pleasure.
What does Australia get out of hosting APEC?
Well, first of all, it gives Australia an enormous profile. There's no doubt about that. Australia will, at least for this week, be very much the centre of the world, and I think it illustrates a point about Australia, the significant role that it now plays in international affairs. Second thing is that we chair it, so we can have a little bit more, not a lot more, but a little bit more influence over the agenda than might be the case if we weren't the chair. So in particular, we've been able to put the climate change issue into the centre of the agenda. Where somebody else had chaired it, that may not have happened. And we've been able to drive that issue through the preliminaries leading up to the leaders' meeting at the end of the week. So we also have put a lot of emphasis on economic restructuring and liberalisation, particularly, as we say, behind borders within economies. I guess that's not very newsworthy, but it's a very important component of building a more liberal economic community through APEC, and because we're the chair, we've been able to drive that.
Nonetheless, despite those positive points, if you've been watching the commercial TV news and listening to Talkback Radio, much of the focus so far has been on negative things, the disruption to Sydney, the traffic, the security. How do you explain this attitude towards APEC?
Well, I think inevitably there'll be some media focus on changes to traffic arrangements, and the protesters, of course.
But it's very much the public. The public's been ringing in all day on Talkback Radio complaining.
The protesters, anyway, will definitely get a lot of publicity, as they always do in any Western country. That's why they conduct protests, in order to get publicity for them.
But what about the attitude of the public to this event?
Well, I think my take of it is, I can't speak for people in Sydney who are directly affected. I feel sorry for them, but most Australians, including me, don't live in Sydney, remember, and for those of us who don't live in Sydney, it doesn't disrupt it. I think in the end people will recognise that this is about Australia being a really significant country and taking its rightful place in the world and driving global agendas, including climate change, which if we were just a little country and no one ever visited, we could never influence. So I think most people will come to that conclusion, and obviously some people who will be inconvenienced, and I feel sorry for them and I can understand their irritation. And then there are the usual bunch of extremists and radicals who will, scream and shout and try to get publicity, mainly through bad behaviour.
Why was the decision made to hold APEC in Sydney rather than, say, Canberra or even off on an island somewhere?
Well, you have to have somewhere for people to sleep. I made the point about this being a significant country. Australia is a truly significant country, not to embarrass ourselves by not having anywhere for people to stay. Sydney is the city which, Sydney and Melbourne are the cities that have enough accommodation. Sydney is a spectacularly beautiful city. I often say to people there are 10 or so cities in the world you've got to see before you die, and definitely one of them is Sydney. It's, even though I'm from Adelaide, Sydney is a wonderful city, so we can be enormously proud of showcasing Sydney to the world. So it's partly just a practical thing of needing the accommodation, and it's partly that we've got a wonderful city to show the world.
To look at the mechanics of APEC, it has swollen to 21 members over time, which some people say makes it a little bit unwieldy. It's competing against an ever-growing number of regional organisations, ASEAN, ASEAN Plus 3, the East Asia Summit. Is APEC in its current form past its use-by date? Oh
no, I think APEC's done a wonderful thing over many years. Let me just quote two or three figures to you since 1989, when APEC was founded, to illustrate my point. Average tariff protection has, effective tariff protection, has reduced from 17% to 5% amongst the APEC economies. We've seen a tripling of real per capita GDP in that period, a tripling of wealth in APEC. And for those who, I think quite rightly, participate in the Make Poverty History campaign, I'm very much a supporter of that. The point I make about APEC is you have seen a halving of poverty in the APEC economy since 1989. So now not all of that can be attributed to APEC, of course. I'm not over-claiming for APEC, but APEC has been a real intellectual driving force towards economic liberalisation and growing prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region, and building a greater sense of community as well. So it's been very successful.